From here, a report from Human Rights Watch about the treatment of Turkic Muslims in China has found evidence of large-scale repression and surveillance as part of a mass crackdown. Nadia from our community is in Malaysia, but wanted us to cover the issue out of China.
China is currently committing a human rights violation towards the Uyghur minority by stripping away their freedom and sending them to re-education camps. The persecution of the Uyghur minority has been going on for far too long, yet it is unheard of due to state-led media censorship. If the world doesn't act soon, we stand the risk of having another crisis similar to the Rohingya crisis, yet at a much larger and dangerous scale due to China's population and political influence in the region.
The Human Rights Watch report entitled Eradicating Ideological Viruses, China's Campaign of Repression Against Xinjiang's Muslims, presents new evidence of the Chinese government's mass arbitrary detention, torture, and increasingly pervasive controls on the daily life of more than 13 million Turkic Muslims. An estimated 1 million people are being held in prison camps with no access to legal counsel or due process. Here's one former detainee's story.
Müslüman joy gerek, Müslümanның жаңағы жазуын, мұсылман киімін бәрін жоғалту керек. Жаңа бір Қытай болу керек деген жоспарлаған. Жаңағы мейгун санаң деп қояды мемлекет әнін, сосын мемлекеттің жаңа маузудың жырларын, сосын Шинжипиннің мың жасауын, одан кейін жаңағы жалпы Қытай халқының жаңағы өмір тарихын жырлау деп қой сол.
From Washington, D.C., Sophie Richardson is the China director at Human Rights Watch. And in London, Ryan Thum is a historian of Islam in China and India. Ryan and Sophie, thank you for joining us. There's a tweet that I shared out a few hours ago to tell our audience that you were going to be on the show. Let me share it with you here. Hard to believe this, but it's true. China installing QR codes on Uyghur Muslim homes as part of mass security crackdown. And then you see what I mean by this. Ryan, can you explain how this works and why would China want to do this to members of their own communities?
The Chinese state is concerned about resistance from Uyghurs, mostly peaceful resistance, and they're convinced that the reason that Uyghurs are unhappy with Chinese rule is because they have the wrong ideas, and so they're engaged in a project of policing Uyghur thoughts and of trying to transform Uyghurs into more of a Chinese type of culture. So this requires invading the privacy of people's homes. This requires keeping track of where people live and what they're up to. And so this QR code at the door is just one of a myriad of features to help the Chinese police keep track of every individual who's a member of a minority ethnic group in Xinjiang.
Sophie, I want to share this tweet we got from Aya. She's Nadia Azarin, and she's a person, of course, that pitched this segment of the show. She says, I think the main issue for me is how the issue is being censored in the People's Republic of China. Having lived there, this issue is not even spoken in public. Initially, I assumed that was due to fear of persecution, but eventually I realized it's due to them being unaware of it even happening. So, Sophie, of course, this report will mean that people are more aware. What do you think is the biggest finding from this report?
Well, there are a couple of different issues, not least new evidence of horrific abuses. The fact that repression outside the camps is almost as bad as repression inside the camps, and that there are international consequences for people who have family members outside China or people in the diaspora who are being terrorized by Chinese officials largely to try to get them to come back. But to speak to the other person's point a moment ago, people across China are allowed to know what the government wants them to know. And to the extent that they're given any information about Xinjiang at all, it tends to be Islamophobic. It tends to paint that community in very tokenistic terms. And so, there's not much readily available information. And while I'd like to think that our and other people's reports could contribute to changing that, state censorship in China is pervasive. And so it's very difficult for people to get at reports like ours or a program like this one.
Ryan, going back to your Twitter feed here, new evidence shows that China's re-education camps for Uyghurs are expanding even now. What is that new evidence? Tell us a little bit about that.
That tweet was in regard to evidence harvested from the Chinese government's request for construction companies to submit bids to build these camps. And those requests include plans for camps that would be not coming online until later this fall or maybe early in next winter, which suggests that even as we speak right now, new facilities are being built to house people who have been interned based on their ethnicity with no criminal charges.
Sophie, what do you know about what gets people into the camps? What do they have to have done to be taken away?
Well, it's as little as having participated in a religious ceremony. It's resisting participating in the weekly singing of patriotic songs or flag raisings. It's as little as having family members who live in countries like Turkey or Malaysia or Indonesia. It's very important to understand that there's nothing in Chinese law that allows for the establishment of these facilities or the detention of people in them. Essentially, Uyghurs' identity and their thoughts, as Ryan suggested earlier, have become the basis of arbitrary detention.
It's interesting you mentioned having family members abroad can be a reason enough. This is Uyghur Bulletin, who sent us a series of tweets you can see on our Twitter feed. They write in one, it's already a well-known fact that the flow of information from East Turkestan, Xinjiang, to the outside world is strictly controlled by China's state surveillance and censorship apparatus with the help of advanced AI technology. This effectively has prevented the news about the vast network of internment camps to reach the global audience through the internet. And besides the information blockage by the government, self-censorship on social media has become a widespread norm in the Uyghur community. I'm wondering, Sophie, how long do you know that this has been going on?
I've been working on these kinds of issues for 20 years, and throughout that entire time, I have had Uyghur friends and colleagues say that they are deeply frightened about phone calls, about technological communications being surveilled, being monitored. Lower tech versions, having people in the community who are essentially on the Chinese government's payroll who are surveilling others. But I think it's very clear that fear has deepened considerably in the last 2 years as people try desperately to find out what's happening with their family members inside the country, but are also on the receiving end of phone calls from Chinese officials in their hometowns, calling them and saying, you need to come back now. We're concerned about what you're doing overseas, and if you don't come back, your family's going to pay the price.
Ryan, I'm just thinking this report is out there, there's new evidence, it's very clear that the Uyghurs are living, and we've known this for some while, but we've got details that they're living in. It's like almost a George Orwellian kind of reality for them. What happens next? What would happen to the international community if they said to China, okay, well, you need to stop this?
Well, we're already starting to see some pushback from the United States. And it's quite possible that with the U.S. Congress people speaking out and perhaps the executive branch speaking out, which is under consideration at the moment, we'll start to see more countries speaking out. Certainly, there has been a lot of complaint that perhaps some governments are staying silent because of their fear of economic retribution from China. But it seems to me that as awareness grows, that it's going to be hard for governments to convince their own populations that they have a good reason to stay silent on this kind of situation. Because Orwellian, the word you used, is really appropriate for this. There is no private space left for Uyghurs. And one of the remarkable things that came out in this Human Rights Watch report was a report of someone who had a camera installed inside of her own home. We also know about officials living in the homes of Uyghurs, which are also detailed.
And Ryan, I think exactly what you are detailing here is what our community is picking up on. Amar says, not a lot shocks me, but this report about the Chinese government putting QR codes on Uyghur Muslim homes certainly has. I want to thank Sophie and Ryan for being part of this conversation today. And as always, we'll be following the Uyghur story.